There's a part of you that no one ever named. Not in school, not in therapy, not even in meditation. A silent place that lives between your words and your breath, between who you became and who you were before the forgetting. Most people try to raise their vibration by doing more, chanting more, healing more, but nothing truly shifts, because what needs remembering isn't something to do, it's something to become again. Neville Goddard once said, "You rise by assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. But what if the real wish isn't just for a better life? It's to return to the part of you that was never lost, only muted." Greg Braden reminds us that ancient wisdom lives in the body, encoded not in rituals, but in biology. There is a point, not named in most chakra maps, not mentioned in casual spirituality. It's a center that remembers your original frequency, a sacred pulse, waiting to be felt, not fixed. It lives between your solar plexus and your heart, where breath becomes intention, where emotion becomes electricity. You don't have to understand it to feel it. Just bring your attention there, gently, as if you were touching a thread of gold woven beneath your ribs. This isn't a lesson, it's a return to something ancient, intimate, yours. If you felt hollow even in moments of light, if you've chased healing but still feel a quiet ache inside, this message is for you. And maybe you didn't find it. Maybe it found you. If something deep is stirring, stay with me, because this isn't about learning something new. It's about remembering what has always been true. Let the next breath be softer. Let your hand gently meet the space just beneath your heart. Not to fix, just to feel. And as you rest there, ask yourself, not with your mind, but with your body, what if nothing is missing? What if I am not broken? What if something sacred is simply sleeping? The forgotten center is not out there. It's already coded in you, and it's waking up. Now, let's begin to feel the gap, not between who you are and who you want to be, but between who you think you are and the light you've always carried. You've lit candles. You've repeated the affirmations. You've whispered mantras into your pillow like prayers lost in time. And yet, something still feels frozen. Not wrong, just unreachable. That quiet space behind your ribs where joy should land. It feels like it echoes but never responds. Like singing into a cave that forgot how to sing back. This is the hidden ache of the awakening path. Not because you failed, but because something ancient within you hasn't yet been fully seen. You are not numb because you lack light. You are numb because a part of your energy never made it home. It stopped somewhere between your identity and your longing, between the self you protect and the truth you buried. You've done the work, but there's a frequency you can't force, because no amount of doing can bypass the silent dissonance of, "This can't be me," not intellectually, but vibrationally, like trying to sing a note you were taught not to believe in. The forgotten center doesn't respond to pressure. It doesn't open to effort. It softens when you stop performing worthiness. Because this gap, this numbness, isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign of an identity that outgrew its shape. You are not unworthy of healing. You are simply too vast for the version of you still trying to hold everything together. And when you try to elevate your vibration while carrying a self that doesn't recognize the light, your system short circuits. You feel bursts of hope, followed by collapse. Moments of clarity, swallowed by confusion. It's not you. It's the friction between your light and the mask that was never meant to hold it. Let this be the moment where you stop asking, "What am I doing wrong?" and instead begin to ask, "What part of me is still waiting to be remembered?" Gently, let that question settle into the space beneath your ribs. No answer needed, just the vibration of the question itself. That alone begins the real return. Next, we listen to the part of you modern teachings have overlooked, the center that never left you, only waited in silence. Somewhere between the fire of your will and the softness of your heart, there's a space most teachings pass over in silence. It's not adorned with colors or Sanskrit names. It doesn't spin or shine in the usual diagrams, but it listens, and it remembers. This is the diaphragmatic center, not just a place of breath, but of transmission, where emotion meets intention. where your inner voice carries its true resonance, where your body doesn't just breathe, it believes. The ancient traditions knew. Egyptians guarded it in their temples. Vedic texts hinted at its sacred breath. Taoist masters whispered its name only in presence. And still today, we speak from it when we say, "I just felt it in my gut." We touch it when we sigh after grief. We brace it when fear approaches. But most of the time, we ignore it. We bypass it. We armor it. Modern spirituality often skips this center, reaching too high or grounding too low. But this is the middle path, the fulcrum, the bridge, where heaven leans down and earth leans up. It's here that breath becomes sacred, not just air, but energy, not just oxygen, but memory. And when you bring imagination into breath, when you let the diaphragm become more than a muscle, it becomes your amplifier. It echoes what your soul truly intends, not what you say, not what you try, but what you are, beneath all the noise. Here your inner world finds sound, not through words, but through vibration. Feel into this. The breath you just took carried more than air. It carried who you believe yourself to be. And in this moment, perhaps for the first time, you can allow that belief to soften, to shift, to sing something truer. As your attention rests here, just beneath your chest, you might sense a stirring, like a bell that hasn't rung in lifetimes. It's not asking to be awakened. It's waiting for you to remember you're allowed to hear it. And what happens when that sound becomes your own? Now let's reimagine the sacred fire, not as something that rises endlessly, but something that circles back. We've been taught to climb, to reach upward, to ascend towards some distant version of the divine. But what if the sacred journey is not only a rise? What if awakening isn't a ladder, but a circuit returning home? Kundalini, that ancient coiled potential, is not a force that simply escapes the body. It is the essence of return. It rises, yes, but only to come back down again, to root itself in the ordinary, to inhabit your hands, your voice, your gaze, to make the divine not a place above, but a presence within. The forgotten center you've begun to feel, that space just beneath the heart, is the missing bridge, the part of the circuit most seekers never complete, because ascension without embodiment fractures the flow. You feel bursts of insight, then collapse into confusion, moments of bliss, followed by exhaustion. It's not failure, it's disconnection. The energy begins to rise, but without this central point, without this breath-borne gateway, it has nowhere to anchor. Like trying to light a candle with only one wire connected. The current exists, but the circuit is broken. And so many walk away from their awakening, not because it wasn't real, but because it couldn't stay. This center, this silent chamber in the diaphragm, is where heaven meets earth. Not in metaphor, but in felt reality. When energy descends again, through the breath, through the truth of who you are, without performance, without striving, then the mystical becomes real. The divine doesn't escape the body. It chooses to dwell there. Close your eyes, just for a breath. Sense the flow not only upward, but downward. Settling, rooting, claiming. You are not meant to escape. You are meant to embody. Now, we turn toward the pressures that have kept this center closed. The silences we carry in the body, and the breath that can finally set them free. There are silences that live in the body, not the peaceful kind, but the ones that press against your ribs when no one is watching. Grief that was never named. Shame you absorbed before you had words. Ancestral echoes, still folded into your breath. These are not emotions you forgot. They are emotions you learned not to feel. And they didn't just vanish. They compressed into the diaphragm, into the space where your will meets your empathy, where your survival self touches your sacred self. Science now speaks of the vagus nerve, the quiet regulator of your emotional world. When it's out of rhythm, your energy gets trapped between the solar plexus, seat of drive, and the heart, seat of connection. You try to rise, but you tense. You try to love, but you hold. You try to believe, but your breath catches. And in that catching, you lose access to the truth that lives underneath. Imagine this, a breath that carries sorrow so old it has no story, a breath that carries silence passed down through generations. Not because you're broken, but because you belong to a lineage that survived by forgetting. And still, within that same breath is the possibility of remembrance. Not by forcing, but by releasing. Imagine this. As you breathe out, you're not just exhaling air, you're exhaling the self that once had to hold everything together. That self did what it needed to do. But now another self is waking. The one who knows that freedom isn't found in perfection, it's found in softness, in allowing the breath to flow, not as a task, but as a truth. Greg Braden speaks of coherence, a harmony between heart and brain. But that harmony doesn't begin in thoughts. It begins in the breath that dares to feel, not fix, not explain, just feel. Place your awareness in that center beneath your ribs, not to change it, but to let it move, to let it speak, to let it sing again. And as the breath returns, you may sense that this compression was never the enemy. It was the signal, the doorway, the quiet bell waiting to be heard. And now, let's listen more deeply to the symbol of that bell, the one that sounds only when your soul is ready. In certain Tibetan monasteries, there is a bell that is never touched. It rests in silence, unstruck, unmoving, not because it has no sound, but because its sound is sacred. It is only rung when the monk is ready, when presence has deepened, when the silence itself becomes the invitation. That bell lives in you. It rests quietly in the space just beneath your chest, not demanding attention, but waiting for alignment, waiting for truth, waiting for resonance. Most of us have spent our lives trying to be louder, trying to be brighter, trying to do more in order to feel more. But the inner bell doesn't respond to noise. It awakens through stillness. It remembers through sincerity. This sacred center, your diaphragm, isn't a tool. It's not a mechanism. It's an instrument, not meant to be used, meant to be heard. And the more you try to force your vibration to rise, the more you miss what it truly means to resonate. Vibration isn't about volume. It's about coherence, depth, truth. Imagine this. Your diaphragm is a tuning fork, attuned not to what you want to feel, but to what you're ready to embody. And when the breath moves freely here, when emotion is allowed to pulse without judgment, that forgotten bell begins to hum, not loudly, but deeply. You don't rise by trying harder. You rise by going deeper, by becoming so aligned with the essence of who you are that your very breath begins to carry music, not the kind anyone else can hear, but the kind that reminds your soul where it came from. That vibration is already inside you, waiting, not for permission, but for presence. And when that presence lands, when the bell is ready to ring, you'll feel it not as sound, but as remembering. So now, let us turn to someone who found that sound again, not in seeking, but in surrender. In certain Tibetan monasteries, there is a bell that is never touched. It rests in silence, unstruck, unmoving, not because it has no sound, but because its sound is sacred. It is only rung when the monk is ready, when presence has deepened, when the silence itself becomes the invitation. That bell lives in you. It rests quietly in the space just beneath your chest, not demanding attention, but waiting for alignment, waiting for truth, waiting for resonance. Most of us have spent our lives trying to be louder, trying to be brighter, trying to do more in order to feel more. But the inner bell doesn't respond to noise. It awakens through stillness. It remembers through sincerity. This sacred center, your diaphragm, isn't a tool. It's not a mechanism. It's an instrument, not meant to be used, meant to be heard. And the more you try to force your vibration to rise, the more you miss what it truly means to resonate. Vibration isn't about volume. It's about coherence, depth, truth. Imagine this. Your diaphragm is a tuning fork, attuned not to what you want to feel, but to what you're ready to embody. And when the breath moves freely here, when emotion is allowed to pulse without judgment, that forgotten bell begins to hum, not loudly, but deeply. You don't rise by trying harder. You rise by going deeper, by becoming so aligned with the essence of who you are that your very breath begins to carry music, not the kind anyone else can hear, but the kind that reminds your soul where it came from. That vibration is already inside you, waiting, not for permission, but for presence. And when that presence lands, when the bell is ready to ring, you'll feel it not as sound, but as remembering. So now, let us turn to someone who found that sound again, not in seeking, but in surrender. There is a moment that comes quietly, not with chaos, but with calm, not with fear, but with unfamiliar peace. And in that moment, most people walk away, not because they don't want the awakening, but because the nervous system has never known what to do with ease. You've survived storms. You've built resilience in the rubble, but peace, real, cellular peace, feels like stepping into a house you weren't told you could live in. And so, when it finally arrives, the breath becomes shallow, the body contracts, the mind begins to doubt. Is this safe? Is this real? Is this me? That's the threshold, the emotional edge where coherence begins, and the old identity tries to pull you back, because the moment you no longer feel the need to perform, the version of you that was built on survival feels useless, lost, afraid of disappearing, and so it resists, not with screams, but with silence, with forgetfulness, with the sudden urge to retreat. Have you ever felt peaceful and sabotaged it, as if calm itself triggered the alarm? What if that wasn't sabotage? What if it was the shedding of a self that no longer fits the frequency of who you're becoming? This is not failure. This is friction. This is the diaphragm quivering at the edge of transformation. It is the emotional threshold, not between light and dark, but between known and unknown, between the survival self and the awakened self. And if you're here, if you're still listening, then something inside you has already crossed. Not fully, but far enough to feel the pull. Let that be enough. Now, as we come to the final turning, we return to the blueprint, the divine design that never left, only waited in silence. There is a design within you, not a map drawn by others, not a path prescribed by tradition, but a living, breathing blueprint, woven into your biology, etched into your breath. Bruce Lipton reminds us, your beliefs are more powerful than your DNA, but what most forget is that beliefs don't live in thoughts alone. They live in the body, in the spaces between breath and silence, in the cells that held on when words couldn't. The diaphragm, this sacred, unspoken center, is more than a muscle. It is memory. It is translation. It is the space where biology meets spirit and chooses coherence over survival. Neville Goddard said, "Feeling is the secret. Not just any feeling, but the one that becomes real in the body. The one that ripples through your breath, echoes in your spine, and opens something deeper than understanding. This forgotten energy point. It isn't another chakra. It's not another concept to master. It's a bridge between your emotional memory and your spiritual choice. And when that bridge is cleared, not by force, but by presence, then your life no longer flows from fear, but from design, from divine rhythm. The breath becomes your brush, and your body, the canvas. Every inhale is a remembrance, every exhale, a release. And somewhere in the middle, you awaken the part of you that was never broken, only quiet, only waiting. So softly now, let the silence settle. Feel into that space beneath your ribs, not to discover something new, but to recognize something ancient. The blueprint was never missing. You were simply taught to stop listening. But now, you've heard the bell, you've felt the breath, you've remembered the design. Let this be your return, not to the person you were, but to the presence you've always carried. And if something awakened in you, don't keep it silent. Let this message travel to wherever another soul still waits for their sound to return. Each time you return to this truth, you return home. This isn't something to learn, it's something to carry. You didn't just listen, you remembered. If you're still here, it's because something deeper than the mind is listening. Not just the part of you that seeks, but the part that knows, the part that never forgot. There are words meant to teach, and there are words meant to awaken. This was never meant to instruct you. It was meant to remember you. And if, in some quiet corner of your breath, you felt a shift, a softening, a stirring, a single thread of light pulling inward, then you are already inside the reactivation. Because this message is not an idea. It's a key, not one that opens doors outside you, but one that unlocks what has always been encoded within. There are others like you, walking through their days with a bell inside them, still untouched, still waiting, still remembering, in dreams, in sighs, in sudden waves of longing. This isn't just your path, it's our collective return to coherence, to embodied truth, to breathe as prayer and presence. So let this message travel, let it echo, even silently, in the way you speak, in the way you breathe, in the way your eyes now hold the world. Because the activation doesn't begin when someone tells you, it begins when you feel seen, when something inside you says, yes, that's me, I've always been this, and now you carry it, not because it's heavy, but because it's real, because it's yours. This breath, this center, this light, each time you return to this truth, you return home. You didn't just listen, you remembered. And somewhere, someone else will feel that, through you.